In this chapter, we're going to put in our buttonholes. I always like to put the buttonholes in before I close the side seam, before I put the sleeves in, because it's way easier. So the buttonholes here, again, we are going to put them in so that the top buttonhole here obviously goes in horizontally, and then the buttonholes on the placket are put in vertically. And you need to make sure that the top one on the placket sits maybe 2 centimeters, 2.5 centimeters below your collar stand, because a lot of the time top button isn't closed. What you don't want it to sit there so it falls open like that. You only want it to come to this point. Now obviously this is also marked on your pattern, so you can work with that. But as you will see in a minute, I changed the position of this because I'm reducing it by 1 button because my buttons are really big and I didn't want that. So what you can do is, when you have slightly bigger buttons, not like the tiny little shirt buttons, you can put it in how you like. And what I did here is we've got the 2.5 centimeters down where I start my buttonhole, and then the button diameter here is 1.2 centimeters. And then the distance is 7 centimeters from the start of this buttonhole to the start of that buttonhole. That might be nice to know, so that when you do yours and you say, yeah, I like these bigger buttons, I'm going to do them, so that you can space them out exactly like I did in this video here. And I decide where I want that top buttonhole to go. I don't think it matters too much about the check here, at least not for this. So I'm going to mark it right there. And now I'm going down to the second one, and that is 7 centimeters, or what's that, 2 3/4 inches. And I mark my line here as well. Now I can take these buttons off because I have got the distance. So now the next one has to be the same distance down. Oh, I think this really is going, this pen. I need a new one. And then I do the next one, same distance down. And the next one, same distance down. Can move these off. And now I know this has a distance of 7 centimeters each from where I start my buttonhole. And we're doing that one last. And now what I'm going to do is adjust half my placket. And we don't go from the edge here, we go from the start of the placket, and I move it so it's equally over on this side and that side to get my 3 centimeters, because I did fold it over according to my check, and so that might be a little out, of course. And then I go to 1.5, which is half of 3, and that's right by the edge here, which is really handy, because now I can just mark all the other ones real quick there, and that's it. I've already marked it. Now we're on to marking the last buttonhole here on the top, and we need to draw a line straight up. You can use a ruler or tape measure, it's absolutely fine. Just mark a line straight up so you know where that is, and then you go over a couple of millimeters and mark that, and that's where your buttonhole has to start. You don't want to start it there, because don't forget you're going to have a tab over, and if you do that, the button is not going to sit in the right position. So you move on over, which is, hang on, it's about 1.5 from the edge, right? That's where we're going to start our buttonhole. So now we're going to mark the horizontal where we're going to sew as well. So you want to mark yourself the center, and that's 3 centimeters. So we go on a half, whatever it is, you take half of that, and then you move to where roughly the end of the buttonhole might be, and you have that, and then you can just draw the direction of your buttonhole. And your buttonhole foot will do the length anyway. There's no need to mark where the buttonhole needs to end. And we can now work all of these buttonholes in. The first thing we have to do is release the tension a bit. So we're going on to buttonhole tension, and we put our zigzag on 5. And then on my puff machine, I'm going to go on step 1 on my sewing machine. Just click the 1. And then I'm going to take my foot off and I'm going to hunt for my buttonhole foot. And lucky me, it's actually in there. More often than not, it's disappeared somewhere into some drawer. Then I'm going to put my buttonhole foot on. There we go. And you should actually always do the lowest buttonhole first. Don't forget to put the stitch length down as well. I like my zigzag to be rather widely spread. I don't like it to be too tight. And then I'm going to insert my first zigzag stitch all the way down. And then we have a tab, and then we go back up the other way, do another tab, and then we can take it out and kind of check whether this buttonhole came out really well or not. Of course, you can do a test one first as well, but it never is quite the same. You will find that on your test it'll be perfect, and then all of a sudden it's more difficult. So let's do a few more now and look in detail at what you are doing. First, put your needle down exactly in that cross that you've drawn. That's the first step. Then lift the presser foot and move your buttonhole foot to the marking on the buttonhole foot that's correct for your button. And the length of the buttonhole is the diameter of your button plus the width of the button plus a couple of millimeters extra for ease, if you will, to push your button through. So that's the length. So you want to go to that mark on the buttonhole foot, and then you put that buttonhole in by doing first a zigzag line down one side, a tab, zigzag line down the other side, and back. So now we're going to finish this one, and then we're going to have a little close up here so you can see it again. Put the needle down into the cross. Move down the presser foot to the marking that your button will need. In my case, it's just a little bit more than 1.5. And you can see how I hold it with my left hand. I hold it, I pull it, and I make sure that I stay on that same distance all the way down. Now, it is easier when you have a check or a stripe because you can see when you start slipping. And if your seam allowance is a little bit too thick, it will want to slide down a little bit. So you really need to hold on to that. Or alternatively, unlike me, don't forget to cut your seam allowances back. This is something that I've done for 30 years and I still forget to do it. So you can learn from my pet mistake really and do that better. Right, and again we're going to put the needle down in that cross. We put in the right length, then we sew down the first line of zigzag stitching, put the tab in and come up the other side. And you can really see how I pull it. I really had to work this, but the beauty is on a mechanical machine you can do that. It will never stop sewing just because it decides to, like the electronic ones, which are a bit of a nuisance. Right, let's do it again. Put the needle down in the cross. Now make sure that it's in the right position, the right length, and do your first line down. Then the tab, and then you come back the other way. And of course on my puff machine I've got buttons there on the side. That's different for every machine, so you need to follow the instructions on your machine for that. Right, another tab, a few stitches on the side just to lock in the stitch, and there we go. Now at the top, if you haven't cut the seam allowance back, it's particularly difficult because it really is thick, it really wanted to push, and it is almost like a step down. Now we want to put the needle down again in the cross, and then I line up my presser foot in between my collar stand, so it's right central. You've got a little bit of a metal gap there, so you can have your line running towards this gap as well. and then you put the first line of zigzag in, you tap and come up the other side. And the one thing I would say is where you turn in the fabric at the top there, that I wouldn't cut back, but everything else, cut it back in that area in layers and you have no issue at all. In my case, that wasn't here so easy, and yeah, it really did want to push. So make sure you cut your seam allowances back, then that doesn't happen to you. In the end, it turned out fine, but that's because I really had to manipulate my collar. Right, so the buttonholes are in. It is never that easy, and every time I do buttonholes, literally every time I think, why didn't I cut this back a little bit more? So I would really recommend that you make this a little bit shorter. And I've pushed in the binding, of course, and I left it the full width, and I should have cut that back as well. I think that would have made so much more sense. Because it is literally going to the buttonhole. If it was over a little bit, it would have been a lot easier. So I would recommend that you cut that back, especially up here. It's right to there, my seam allowance, and that made it quite hard to get the top buttonhole in. But of course, it's all possible. I just want to make it easier for you, not harder. So I would recommend that you cut the seam allowance a little bit back in here. When you're opening up a buttonhole with a quick unpick, it is really important that you put a pin through the top here, just where your buttonhole ends, so that you don't accidentally rip it. So we go in here really deep and then straight up until we hit that pin. And then you can see if your button goes through, if you need to open it up a bit more. Yeah, I do. And if I want to open it up a bit more, what I'm going to do now for this one, top almost fine, this one is a bit tighter. I'm going to go in here from that angle there, just a tiny, tiny bit. And that will probably do the trick. Yep, that's fine. Okay, so then we repeat this process. Now we're going to put our buttons on. So you want to put your index finger under two strands of thread, wrap it around your needle, and then you just pull it through between your finger, and look, you've got a little knot. There you go. So now I'm ready to put on my buttons. Now we know that I want to put my buttons on so that we can see this piping. So I'm going to move it right to the edge. And then I'm going to go to the top one here, because even now, I mean, you can go to the center for buttons that are done up, but just imagine it's not done up, and I don't want this to shimmy down further, yeah, to distort. So this time I'm going to go fairly high up where I'm going to put my button, and that is right there, so you can see it. So go through, there we are, and thread your button on. So what you want to do is leave a little bit here standing so that you have the button not too close and tight. So I'm going to now go through again. Goodness me, this is really wanting to tangle like crazy. Hang on. Go through again. Make sure that button is still nice and loose. And I'm going to do it from the other side as well. There we are. Go through again. There we go. So I'm going to wrap around in a motion going downwards, and what I get is like a little stand here, so that we have enough room when we do the button up for it to not look like it's sort of forced down. We'll do a loop, go through, set, can also, to make sure it doesn't come off at all, you can just run this anywhere like that, and then a bit of tension, cut it off. So that's how you sew on a button. So when I do this up now, it'll sit in the right position. For the top button, you need to put it in the far corner here, right? You go through with your needle to that point, and then wherever that is, that's where you put your button on. And I'm going to finish all the other buttons now, and I think it looks absolutely gorgeous.